The winter of 1887 came early to Redemption Creek, and Eli Hawthorne felt it in his bones before the first snow fell. Standing on the porch of his weathered cabin, he watched storm clouds gather over the distant mountains, dark as the thoughts that haunted him these 3 years past. His left leg ached where shrapnel from the mine explosion had torn through muscle and sinew, leaving him with a limp that worsened with the cold. The ranch stretched before him, 40 acres of stubborn grassland and scrub brush, bordered by a creek that ran dry half the year. It wasn't much, but it was far enough from town that no one bothered him. That was how he preferred it. The nearest neighbor lived 8 miles east, and Eli hadn't spoken more than 10 words to the man in 2 years. He shifted his weight off his bad leg and surveyed his small herd of cattle huddled near the barn. 23 head, down from 30 after wolves got brave last spring. They'd need extra feed to make it through what promised to be a hard winter. The hay in the barn might last until February if he rationed it careful-like. After that, he'd have to make the 2-day ride to Redemption Creek for supplies, a prospect that sat in his stomach like spoiled meat. The townsfolk still looked at him with that mixture of pity and discomfort reserved for those touched by tragedy. Some crossed the street when they saw him coming. Others tried to make conversation about nothing at all, their eyes sliding away from his scarred face. Both responses made him want to mount his horse and ride until the town disappeared behind him. Inside the cabin, he stoked the fire in the cast-iron stove and set coffee to boil. The place was sparse, a single room with a bed in one corner, a rough-hewn table with 2 chairs, though only one was ever used, and shelves lined with preserves and dry goods. On the mantel sat a photograph in a tarnished frame, turned face down. He hadn't looked at it in 2 years, but he couldn't bring himself to burn it either. The coffee was bitter and strong, the way he'd learned to make it in the mining camps before. He didn't let his mind wander down that path. Some doors were better left closed. By noon, the temperature had dropped 20 degrees. Ice formed on the water troughs, and the horses stamped restlessly in the corral. Eli spent the afternoon reinforcing the barn doors and checking for gaps in the walls where wind might whistle through. His hands, once soft from ledger work at the mining company office, were now thick with calluses and scarred from barbed wire and rope burns. He was heading back to the cabin when he saw her. A figure stood at the fence line where his property met the wagon road, a woman in a worn brown dress and a shawl that had seen better days. She held a canvas bag in one hand, the kind travelers used for carrying their few possessions. Her other hand rested on the fence post, as if she needed it to keep standing. Eli stopped in his tracks, his hand moving instinctively to the Colt .45 on his hip. Strangers didn't come out this way without reason, and the reasons were rarely good. But the woman made no move toward him. She simply stood there, watching him with eyes the color of winter sage. He approached slowly, favoring his good leg up close. He could see she was younger than him, maybe 25 or 26. Her dark hair was pinned up neat, but wisps had escaped to frame a face that might have been pretty if not for the exhaustion etched into every line. Her dress was clean, but patched in several places. No wedding ring on her finger, but a pale band of skin suggested one had been there not long ago. "Ma'am," he said, the word rough from disuse. "Mr. Hawthorne?" Her voice was steady despite the cold. "I heard in town you might have work needs doing." He almost laughed, a bitter sound that died in his throat. "You heard wrong. I can cook, clean, tend animals." She lifted her chin slightly. "I'm not asking for charity, just work for room and board through winter." "Don't need help." The man at the feed store said different. Said you've been managing alone since... She stopped herself, color rising in her cheeks despite the cold. Since the accident, since Mary and little Sarah burned while he was pulled from the rubble, his leg mangled but his life intact. The whole town knew the story. They'd probably told her every detail, complete with speculation about how he'd started the fire with his carelessness, though the mining company's investigation had cleared him of fault. Not that it mattered. Dead was dead, whether by accident or negligence. Feed store gossips like old women, he said. Answer's no. She nodded once, accepting the rejection with a dignity that made something twist in his chest. But instead of leaving, she swayed slightly, her grip on the fence post tightening. When's the last time you ate? The question came out before he could stop it. Yesterday morning. No self-pity in her voice, just fact. He cursed under his breath. The nearest shelter was back in Redemption Creek, a good 15 miles. The sky was already darkening with the promise of snow. Even if she started walking now, she'd never make it before the storm hit. Barn's out back, he said, not looking at her. Old tack room's got a cot. You can stay the night. Be gone come morning. I can work. Didn't say nothing about work, just offering shelter from the storm. Christian thing to do. The words tasted like sawdust. He hadn't felt particularly Christian since God saw fit to take everything that mattered. She studied him for a long moment, seeming to weigh her options. Pride warred with practicality in her expression, a battle he recognized from his own mirror. Thank you, she said finally. He turned without another word and headed for the barn, not waiting to see if she followed. Behind him, he heard the gate creak open and her footsteps on the frozen ground. They walked in silence, him leading, her maintaining a careful distance. The first snowflakes began to fall as they reached the barn door. The tack room was small but dry, with a narrow cot pushed against one wall and hooks for harnesses on the other. A pile of old horse blankets sat in the corner. It smelled of leather and hay and the faint must of disuse. There's a well out front for water, he said. Outhouse is behind the cabin. Don't come to the house. She set her bag on the cot. I understand. He started to leave, then paused at the doorway. What's your name? May Sullivan. She met his eyes directly. Widow Sullivan. If we're being proper, widow. So they had that in common. At least, though he doubted her loss came with the weight of blame his carried. There's jerky and hardtack in the barn storage, he said. Help yourself. He left before she could thank him again, closing the door firmly behind him. Back in his cabin, he tried not to think about the woman in his barn. Come morning, she'd be gone, and his life would return to its careful emptiness. That was how he wanted it, how it needed to be. But as the storm rolled in and the wind began to howl, he found himself standing at the window, looking toward the barn. A faint light glowed in the tack room window. She'd found the lantern he kept there. For a moment, just a moment, the ranch didn't feel quite so empty. He turned away from the window and added another log to the fire. Tomorrow she'd be gone. Tonight was just charity. Nothing more. He'd done what decency required and no more than that. In the barn, May Sullivan sat on the thin cot and slowly removed her worn boots. Her feet were blistered from walking, and she bit her lip to keep from crying out as she peeled off her stockings. The jerky was tough as leather, but she ate it gratefully, washing it down with water so cold it made her teeth ache. She'd recognized the look in Eli Hawthorne's eyes, the careful blankness of someone who'd learned to feel nothing rather than feel too much. She'd seen it in her own mirror these past months. He'd lost someone. That much was clear from the town gossips. A wife and child in a mining accident, they'd said. Voices dropping to whispers as they glanced toward his empty house on the hill. She pulled the horse blankets around her shoulders and listened to the storm build outside. She'd told herself she just needed work, nothing more, but watching him walk away, favoring that injured leg. She'd recognized something else in him, too. The bone-deep loneliness of someone who'd forgotten how to be anything but alone. Come morning, he expected her gone. But May Sullivan had nowhere else to go, and winter was just beginning. She'd survived worse than a bitter man's coldness, and maybe, just maybe, she could make herself useful enough that he'd let her stay. Outside, the snow fell harder, covering the tracks they'd made from the gate to the barn. By dawn, it would be as if she'd never walked that path at all. But May pulled the blankets tighter and settled in to wait. She'd learned patience in the months since Thomas died, learned to endure what couldn't be changed. And Eli Hawthorne, whether he knew it or not, needed help. Not just with the ranch work. Any fool could see that. But with the careful way he held himself apart from the world, like a man afraid to be touched. She recognized that kind of wound. She carried her own, after all. The wind rattled the barn walls, and somewhere in the darkness, cattle lowed uneasily. May closed her eyes and tried to sleep, but her mind kept returning to the moment at the fence. When their eyes had met, something had passed between them in that instant. Not attraction or even interest, but recognition. The acknowledgement of one damaged soul to another. Come morning, she decided, she wouldn't be gone. She'd be at work, whether he'd asked for it or not. Sometimes people didn't know what they needed until it was standing right in front of them, and May Sullivan, widow and outcast, had nothing left to lose by trying. Eli woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of someone moving around his kitchen. For a moment, caught between sleep and waking, he thought Mary was making breakfast. Then reality crashed down like cold water, and his hand went to the revolver under his pillow. The widow. She was supposed to be gone. He dressed quickly, favoring his bad leg as he pulled on his boots. Through the frost-covered window, he could see fresh snow had fallen during the night, at least 8 inches, with drifts against the barn. When he opened the cabin door, she was standing at his stove, her back to him, stirring something in a pot. Thought I made myself clear, he said. She didn't turn around. Coffee's hot. Biscuits will be ready soon. I said, I heard what you said. She finally faced him, and he noticed her dress was different from yesterday. Still worn, but clean and pressed. But your pantry's near empty. Your dishes haven't been washed in days, and that wound on your hand is starting to fester. He glanced down at his left hand, where barbed wire had left a deep gash 3 days ago. He'd wrapped it in a dirty cloth and forgotten about it. Don't need nursemaiding. Not offering it. She turned back to the stove. Just earning my keep. Sit down before the biscuits burn. He should have thrown her out. Should have pointed to the door and used whatever words necessary to make her leave. Instead, he found himself sitting at the table he'd made with his own hands back when he'd had reason to build things meant to last. The coffee was better than anything he'd made in 3 years. The biscuits were light and fluffy. Nothing like the hardtack he usually gnawed for breakfast. She'd found the jar of preserves Mary had put up the summer before she died, and the sweet taste of raspberries made his throat tight. May ate standing at the counter, quick, efficient bites between tasks. She'd already washed the pile of dishes that had accumulated by the basin, and now she was heating water for more cleaning. She moved around his kitchen like she'd been doing it for years, never asking where things were, just finding them. Storm's not letting up, she said, not looking at him. Your cattle will need hay brought out. I can help. I can manage. With that leg and that infected hand? She set down her plate and fixed him with those sage-green eyes. Pride's a luxury neither of us can afford. Mr. Hawthorne. He wanted to argue, but she was already pulling on a heavy coat that must have been in the barn, one of Mary's old work coats he'd shoved out there to avoid seeing it. On May Sullivan. It fit like it was made for her. They worked in silence, him pitching hay from the loft while she distributed it to the cattle below. She knew her way around livestock. He'd give her that. Didn't flinch when the bull snorted at her, just smacked his flank and kept working. When they were done, she insisted on looking at his hand. This needs proper cleaning, she said, unwinding the filthy bandage. The wound was angry red, starting to ooze. You got whiskey? For drinking, not wasting. Infection will waste you worse than whiskey will. She didn't wait for permission, just went to the cabin and returned with his bottle of rye and clean cloth torn from something. The alcohol burned like hellfire, and he bit down on a curse. She worked with steady hands, cleaning the wound thoroughly before wrapping it tight with fresh bandage. Where'd you learn doctoring? My mother was a midwife, taught me about wounds and healing. Her hand stilled for a moment. Couldn't save my husband, though, belly wound from a knife fight. Bled out in our bed while I tried to stop it with every trick she'd taught me. He didn't ask about the fight. In the territories, men died for all manner of reasons. Card games, land disputes, looking at another man's woman wrong, or just being in the wrong place when whiskey and tempers ran hot. "Town treating you fair?" he asked instead. A bitter smile touched her lips. "Fair as they treat any widow without money or family. Some of the men think a woman alone is looking for company. The women think I must have done something to deserve my fate. Maybe smiled too much at their husbands. Maybe didn't keep house proper. Maybe carried some curse that got Thomas killed. That why you're out here looking for work in a snowstorm?" Mrs. Patterson at the boarding house said I was attracting the wrong element. Suggested I might find employment elsewhere. She tied off the bandage with efficient movements. "Feed store clerk mentioned you lived alone out here. Figured a man who keeps to himself might not care about town gossip." "Don't care about much of anything. I noticed." She gathered the bloody cloths and stood. "That's why I'm staying. You need help whether you'll admit it or not, and I need work. Seems like a fair trade." He watched her walk back to the cabin with his whiskey and the soiled bandages. Part of him wanted to call after her, tell her to pack up and go. The words wouldn't come. Maybe it was the throbbing in his hand, now properly tended. Maybe it was the way she'd handled the cattle, competent and unflustered. Or maybe it was just the exhaustion of fighting everything alone for so long. She stayed. Over the next days, a routine developed without either of them discussing it. She slept in the barn but spent her days working, cooking, cleaning, mending clothes he hadn't realized needed mending. She helped with the animals morning and evening. They ate meals together in silence. Her at the counter, him at the table, like two strangers sharing a boarding house dining room. At night, he'd watch the lantern light in the barn until it went out, then lie awake listening to the wind and trying not to think about another woman who'd once moved through these rooms. May didn't push, didn't try to make conversation beyond what work required. But she was always there, coffee ready when he woke, supper waiting when he came in from the cold. His clothes appeared clean and folded. The cabin began to smell less like loneliness and more like bread baking and wood soap. He found himself watching her when she wasn't looking, the way she hummed softly while kneading dough. How she'd pause at the window sometimes, staring at something beyond the snow-covered fields. The careful way she stepped around the floorboard that creaked near the stove, as if she knew the sound bothered him. 2 weeks passed before he found her crying. He'd gone to the barn late one night to check on a cow showing signs of colic. The lantern in the tack room was out, but he heard the sound. Muffled sobs, like someone trying to cry quiet enough not to be heard. He stood frozen outside the door, his hand raised to knock, but couldn't make himself do it. Mary used to cry like that in the weeks after they'd lost the baby that came before Sarah, trying to hold it in, to not burden him with her grief. He'd held her then, whispered promises that they'd try again, that God had a plan. Empty words that proved emptier still when God's plan included taking both her and Sarah in fire and smoke. He turned away from the door and tended the sick cow in silence. But the sound of May's crying followed him back to the cabin and into his dreams. The next morning, she was at the stove as always. No sign of the night's tears except a slight puffiness around her eyes. She poured his coffee and set down a plate of eggs and fried potatoes without comment. "Cow's better," he said. "That's good." He cleared his throat. "That coat, the one you've been wearing, it suits you." She paused in her washing up. "It's warm, practical." "It was my wife's." The words hung between them like icicles, sharp and fragile. May's hands stilled in the soapy water. "I can wear something else." "No." The word came out rougher than intended. No point in it going to waste. She nodded slowly and returned to the dishes. But something had shifted. Some invisible wall cracked just enough to let a sliver of light through. That evening, she ate at the table instead of the counter. Still didn't talk much, but the silence felt different, less like two strangers avoiding each other and more like two people who understood some things didn't need words. The infection in his hand healed clean under her care. She found other wounds too, cuts and scrapes he'd ignored, the chronic ache in his leg that worsened with the cold. Without asking, She started making liniment from herbs she must have brought in that canvas bag, working it into his leg muscles when the pain made him limp worse than usual. "You don't have to," he started one night as she knelt beside his chair, working the pungent salve into his calf. "I know." Her hands kept moving, strong and sure. "But it needs doing." He stared at the fire while she worked, trying not to think about how long it had been since anyone had touched him with gentleness. Her hands were calloused but careful, finding each knot of scar tissue and working it loose. The relief was almost painful. "Thomas used to get into fights," she said quietly, still working. "Come home bloodied and bruised, full of whiskey and righteous anger about some slight or other. I'd patch him up, time after time, begged him to stop, to think before he threw that first punch. But he said a man had to defend his honor." Her hands stilled. "His honor got him a knife in the belly and me a reputation as a curse on any man fool enough to want me. You're not cursed." She looked up at him then, those sage eyes bright with unshed tears. "Neither are you." But he was. He knew it down to his bones. Cursed to survive what should have killed him. To carry the weight of empty rooms and unfinished conversations. Cursed to wake each morning and remember all over again why the other side of the bed was cold. May corked the liniment jar and stood, wiping her hands on her apron. "I'll be going to town tomorrow. We need supplies. Roads are barely passable. I've driven worse, made a list of what's needed." She pulled a paper from her pocket, written in neat script. "Unless you'd rather go yourself." He almost said yes, just to be contrary. But the thought of facing those pitying looks and whispered conversations made his stomach turn. "Take the wagon and the rifle." She nodded and turned to go, then paused at the door. "That picture on the mantel, the one that's face down, you should either look at it or put it away. Leaving it like that just makes it hurt worse." Before he could respond, she was gone, the door closing soft behind her. He sat by the fire long after, staring at that overturned frame and wondering when May Sullivan had started reading his silences as clear as spoken words. The storm came 3 days after May's trip to town, arriving with the kind of fury that turned the world white and shapeless. Eli had seen it building in the way the cattle bunched together and the horses grew restless, in the ache that spread through his damaged leg like frost through window glass. "Going to be a bad one," he said over breakfast, watching the sky through the kitchen window. May nodded, already making mental inventory. "We've got enough wood split. I'll help you get the animals secure." They worked through the morning, driving the cattle into the barn and reinforcing the doors. The wind picked up as they finished, driving snow horizontal across the fields. By the time they made it back to the cabin, visibility had dropped to mere feet. "Your room in the barn won't hold against this," Eli said, stomping snow from his boots. "Temperature's dropping fast." She stood by the door, snow melting from her coat, Mary's coat, onto the floor. "I'll manage. I've got the blankets." "You'll freeze." He jerked his head toward the cabin. "There's room here." The words hung between them, heavy with implication. In the weeks since she'd arrived, they'd maintained careful boundaries. He slept in the cabin, she in the barn. They ate together but lived apart. 2 people sharing space but not lives. "I don't think, not asking you to think, storm like this will kill you sure as a bullet." He moved to the stove, adding wood with sharp, agitated movements. "You can take the bed. I'll sleep by the fire." "That's not necessary." "Damn it, woman. Will you for once just do as you're told without arguing?" She flinched at his tone, and he immediately regretted it. But she gathered her few possessions from the barn before the storm made it impossible, settling them in the corner of the cabin like she was trying to take up as little space as possible. The blizzard hit full force by evening, wind screaming around the cabin walls like something alive and hungry. They ate supper in tense silence, aware of each other in ways the routine of separate quarters had allowed them to ignore. When darkness fell, May tried to insist on taking the floor, but Eli would have none of it. He made a pallet of blankets by the stove, leaving her the bed he'd shared with Mary. She changed behind the hanging blanket that served as a privacy screen, and he kept his back turned, staring into the fire. Sleep wouldn't come. The storm raged outside, but inside the cabin was a different kind of tension. He could hear her breathing, restless in the bed. Every shift of the mattress rope seemed loud as gunshot. Near midnight, he heard her get up, bare feet on cold floor, moving careful in the dark. She added wood to the stove, then stood there warming her hands. "Can't sleep either?" he asked. She startled slightly. "The wind. It sounds like voices sometimes." Mary used to say that too. It was the first time he'd spoken his wife's name aloud in her presence. May moved closer to the fire, pulling a blanket around her shoulders. In the flickering light, she looked younger, more vulnerable than the capable woman who worked alongside him each day. "Tell me about her," she said softly. He was quiet so long she probably thought he wouldn't answer. But the storm had created a strange intimacy, like they were the only two people left in a world gone white and wild. "She was everything I wasn't," he finally said. "Warm where I was cold, full of laughter where I was serious. She could make friends with anyone, draw them out with her smile. Used to joke that she married me just to have a project, something ornery to work on." "How did you meet?" "Her father ran the general store in Redemption Creek. I was working at the mine, came in for supplies. She was behind the counter, arguing with old Jim Patterson about the price of flour, giving him hell for trying to cheat a widow on a fixed income. I knew right then I'd marry her or die trying." May smiled, the first genuine smile he'd seen from her. "How long did it take to convince her?" "6 months of making excuses to buy things I didn't need. Her father caught on quick, started finding reasons to be out when I came calling. Mary made me work for it, though. Said she wasn't marrying any man who couldn't dance proper at the church social." He found himself almost smiling at the memory. "I've got 2 left feet on a good day. With this leg, I was hopeless even then, but I learned she was worth it." They fell quiet, listening to the wind howl. The fire popped, sending sparks up the chimney. "Thomas wasn't a bad man," May said suddenly. "Just young and proud and too quick with his fists. He wanted to be something more than a ranch hand. Wanted people to look at him with respect. But respect isn't won with violence." She pulled the blanket tighter. "The night he died, he'd gone to collect wages owed from a cattle drive. The rancher's son said something about me. Something crude. Thomas demanded satisfaction. And the son had a knife. His friends said it was self-defense, that Thomas threw the first punch. Maybe he did. All I know is I held him while he bled out, trying to keep his insides from spilling through my fingers. And his last words were, 'Did I defend your honor?' What did you tell him?" "I lied. Said he did fine. That I was proud." Her voice broke slightly. "What else could I say? That his pride had made me a widow at 24? That his need for respect had cost us the future we'd planned?" Eli stood, his leg protesting, and moved to sit beside her on the floor. Not touching, but close enough that she could feel his warmth. "I was in the mine office when the explosion hit," he said. "Going over ledgers, arguing with the foreman about overtime pay. If I'd been where I was supposed to be, checking the new shaft with the others, I'd have died clean. Instead, I was 50 feet away when the methane caught. Close enough to be buried in the collapse, far enough to survive it. That's not your fault. I'd promised Mary I'd be home early that day. Sarah had been sick, and she wanted me there. But I thought the ledgers were more important, thought there'd be time later." His hands clenched into fists. They were in town when they heard the explosion. Mary left Sarah with Mrs. Patterson and came running. She was trying to dig me out when the second explosion hit. The fire. He couldn't finish. Didn't need to. May's hand found his in the darkness, her fingers threading through his. Neither of them acknowledged the touch, but neither pulled away either. "I dream about it," he whispered. "See her face in the smoke. Hear Sarah crying for her mama. Wake up trying to run to them on a leg that won't work right anymore. I dream about the blood," May whispered back. "So much blood, and the way Thomas looked at me at the end, like I'd failed him. Like if I'd been a better wife, he wouldn't have needed to prove himself to every fool with an opinion." They sat in silence, hands clasped, watching the fire burn down to embers. Outside, the storm continued its assault, but inside the cabin, something had shifted. Two broken people recognizing themselves in each other's damage. "We should sleep," May finally said, but made no move to leave. "Yeah." Neither of them moved. Her thumb traced small circles on his palm, the touch so light he might have imagined it. He couldn't remember the last time someone had touched him without purpose, not to tend wounds or pass supplies, but just to offer comfort. "Eli?" Her voice was barely audible over the wind. "The photograph, on the mantel." He tensed, but she squeezed his hand gently. "You should look at it, not tonight, but soon. They deserve to be remembered as they were, not as they died. Can't. I know. I burned every picture of Thomas after the funeral. Thought if I couldn't see his face, I couldn't see his blood. But now I wish I had just one, to remember the good times, before pride and violence took him." She turned to look at him, eyes bright with unshed tears. "Don't make my mistake." He wanted to pull away, to rebuild the walls that had kept him functional these 3 years. But her hand in his was an anchor in the storm, and he found himself holding on instead of letting go. "I'll teach you," he said suddenly. "What?" "To dance. At the church social come spring, if we're both still here." She was quiet so long he thought she'd refuse, then soft as snowfall. "I'd like that." They finally separated, her returning to the bed, him to his pallet by the fire, but something fundamental had changed in the space between them. Not attraction, they were both too damaged for that, but understanding, recognition, the first fragile threads of connection between two people who'd forgotten how to be anything but alone. The storm raged for 3 days, trapping them in the cabin together. They talked more in those days than in all the weeks previous. Not about the big things, those were still too raw, but about small memories, the way Mary laughed at his terrible jokes, how Thomas could whistle any tune after hearing it once. The dreams they'd had before loss rewrote their stories. They played cards with a worn deck Eli dug out of a trunk. May taught him gin rummy. He showed her 5-card stud. She won more often than not, having a poker face that would make professional gamblers weep. On the second night, she made soup from dried beans and salt pork, the kind of simple meal that filled the belly and warmed the soul. They ate at the table together, and when their knees bumped underneath, neither pulled away. "This is nice," she said quietly. The soup, the company. He looked up from his bowl to find her watching him with those sage-green eyes, not with pity or desire, but with something harder to name. Recognition, maybe, or just the simple acknowledgement of one survivor to another. "Yeah," he agreed. "It is." On the 3rd night, the nightmares came for him hard. He woke, gasping, Mary's name on his lips, the phantom smell of smoke in his nostrils. Before he could orient himself, May was there, kneeling beside his pallet, her hand cool on his fevered forehead. "Just a dream," she murmured. "You're safe. You're here." He grabbed her hand, holding on like she might disappear. I can't breathe." "Yes, you can. Feel my hand. Breathe with me. In, out. That's it." She stayed with him until his breathing steadied, until the shaking stopped. Then she did something unexpected. She lay down beside him on the pallet, on top of the blankets, fully clothed, not touching except for their joined hands, but present, solid, real. "Is this all right?" she asked. He could only nod, throat too tight for words. They lay in silence, listening to the dying wind outside. Somewhere in the small hours, they both found sleep, still holding hands like children afraid of the dark. When morning came, bringing weak sunlight and the promise of the storm's end, they rose without acknowledging the night's intimacy. But as May made breakfast and Eli checked the window for damage, both were aware that another wall had fallen. Not the final walls. Those would take more time, more trust than either could offer yet, but enough to let in a little light, enough to remember what warmth felt like. The storm had trapped them, but in its fierce embrace, they'd found something neither had come looking for, the possibility that broken didn't mean beyond repair. The morning after the storm broke dawned crystal clear and bitter cold. Eli woke to find May already gone from the cabin, the space beside his pallet empty save for the lingering warmth in the blankets. Through the window, he could see her in the barn, checking on the animals they'd been unable to reach for 3 days. He dressed quickly, shame and confusion warring in his chest. The intimacy of the storm felt wrong in daylight, like something that should have stayed buried beneath the snow. By the time he reached the barn, he'd rebuilt every wall she'd helped him tear down. "Cattle made it through fine," she said without turning around. "Lost 2 chickens to the cold, but the rest are laying again." "Good." She finally looked at him, and something in his face must have told her everything. The warmth in her eyes shuttered closed, replaced by the careful distance of their early days. "I'll be moving back to the tack room today," she said. That's probably best." She nodded once and returned to scattering feed for the chickens. They worked in silence through the morning, clearing snow and tending stock like strangers hired for the same job. When she served lunch, she ate, standing at the counter again. The table might as well have been an ocean between them. The days that followed were worse than before, where once their silence had been companionable. Now it felt charged with things unsaid. Eli threw himself into ranch work with renewed vigor, spending long hours mending fences and checking the far pastures. Anything to avoid the cabin when she was there. May retreated too, speaking only when necessary, moving through her tasks like a ghost. She still cooked and cleaned, still helped with the animals, but the small touches, the humming while she worked, the way she'd sometimes pause to watch the sunset, those disappeared. A week passed, then 2. The false spring that sometimes came to the territory in February arrived, melting snow and turning the roads to mud. Eli told himself he was relieved. Soon the passes would be clear, and she could move on to wherever women like her went when unwelcome wore out its patience. He was splitting wood behind the cabin one afternoon when he heard her scream. The axe fell from his hands as he ran, his bad legs screaming protest. He found her in the root cellar, backed against the wall, her face white with terror. "Snake!" she gasped, pointing to the corner. It was a rattler, probably drawn up from its den by the warming weather. The creature was coiled and ready, its tail singing that unmistakable warning. May was trapped, unable to move without provoking a strike. "Don't move," Eli said, though she clearly had no intention of doing so. "Not a muscle." He backed out slowly, returning with a long-handled hoe. The snake was focused on May, allowing him to get close enough for a clean strike. The blade took its head off in one motion, the body thrashing wildly before going still. May slid down the wall, her legs giving out. She was shaking violently, her breath coming in short gasps. Without thinking, Eli dropped to his knees beside her, pulling her against his chest. "It's dead," he murmured into her hair. "You're safe. It's dead." She clutched his shirt, her face buried in his shoulder. He could feel her tears soaking through the fabric, hot against his skin. They stayed like that for long minutes, her shaking, him holding her, the dead snake forgotten in the corner. Finally, she pulled back, wiping her face with trembling hands. "I'm sorry. I'm not usually afraid of snakes. Rattlers are different. No, it's..." She took a shuddering breath. "Thomas died in February, 2 years ago next week. I thought I was ready, thought I could face it without... But then I saw that snake, and all I could think was how death comes so quick. One moment you're reaching for potatoes, the next..." She gestured helplessly. "Come on," he said, helping her to her feet. "Let's get out of here." He led her to the cabin, settling her in the chair by the fire. She was still pale, still shaking slightly. He poured a generous measure of whiskey and pressed it into her hands. "Drink," she did, coughing slightly as the liquor burned. Color began returning to her cheeks. "I've been a fool," she said suddenly. "What?" "Acting like the storm didn't happen, like we didn't..." She set the glass down, meeting his eyes. "I thought it was what you wanted, the distance, but I can't do it anymore. Eli, I can't pretend I don't see you hurting. Can't pretend I don't care. You should go, he said, the words like ground glass in his throat. Soon as the road's clear, find somewhere safe. Start over. Is that what you want? He turned away, unable to meet her eyes. What I want doesn't matter. It's the only thing that matters. She stood, moving to face him. Tell me you want me gone, and I'll leave, but look me in the eye when you say it. He tried. God help him. He tried to form the words that would send her away, keep her safe from the curse that followed him. But looking into those sage green eyes, seeing the strength and sorrow mixed there, he couldn't lie. I can't, he whispered. Then stop pushing me away. Her hand came up to rest on his cheek, gentle as falling snow. Stop punishing yourself for surviving. You don't understand, don't I? Her thumb traced the scar that ran along his jaw. We both lost everything. We both blame ourselves. But Eli, suffering alone won't bring them back. It just dishonors the love they gave us. He caught her wrist, meaning to pull her hand away. Instead, he found himself holding it there, leaning into the touch he'd denied himself for so long. I'm scared, he admitted, the words barely audible. So am I. She stepped closer, her other hand coming up to frame his face. But I'm more scared of never feeling anything again. Aren't you? He was. The realization hit him like a physical blow. These empty years, this careful nothing, it wasn't living. It was just a slower way of dying. May. She rose up on her toes and kissed him. Soft, hesitant, giving him every chance to pull away. He stood frozen for a heartbeat. 2. Then his arms came around her with desperate hunger. He kissed her back like a drowning man, gulping air, pouring 3 years of loneliness and loss into the connection. When they broke apart, both were breathing hard. May's eyes were bright with tears, but she was smiling, a real smile that transformed her face. Stay, he said roughly. Not in the barn. Here, with me. Are you sure? He thought of Mary, of what she'd want for him. She'd loved him too well to wish this half-life on him. And maybe that was the real betrayal, not moving on, but refusing to, I'm sure. That night, she moved her few possessions back into the cabin. They prepared dinner together, working side by side in comfortable synchronization. When darkness fell, they sat by the fire, not touching but aware of each other in every breath. I won't be her, May said quietly. I can't replace what you lost. I don't want you to be. He reached for her hand, lacing their fingers together. I want you to be you. That's enough. More than enough. She squeezed his hand, and they sat in silence, watching the fire burn low. Outside, a wolf howled in the distance, answered by another. The sound should have been lonely, but somehow it wasn't, just creatures calling to their kind across the darkness, refusing to be alone. When they finally moved to the bed, together this time, though still clothed and careful, Eli found himself able to look at the photograph on the mantel. Just a glance, but enough to see Mary's smile, Sarah's bright eyes. The pain was still there, would always be there, but it no longer felt like drowning. May curled against his side, her head on his shoulder, and he pressed his face into her hair. She smelled like bread and snow and something uniquely her, not like Mary, different, but good in its own way. Thank you, he whispered into the darkness. For what? For being stubborn, for staying when I gave you every reason to go. She tilted her head to look at him. You saved me from that snake today, but Eli, you saved me long before that. That first night, when you let me stay, I was ready to give up, to walk into that storm and let it take me. You gave me a reason to keep going. He kissed her forehead, unable to find words for the emotion swelling in his chest. Not love, not yet. That would take time. Trust, healing, but possibility, hope. The chance that two broken people might build something whole from their pieces. They fell asleep entwined, fully dressed but more intimate than any mere physical connection. And for the first time in 3 years, Eli's dreams were quiet. No smoke, no screams, Just warmth and the steady breathing of someone who'd chosen to stay. In the morning, he woke to find her still there, golden sunrise painting her face. She opened her eyes, smiled sleepily, and he knew with a sudden certainty that this was how he wanted to wake for whatever mornings remained to him. "Good morning," she murmured. "Morning." Regrets. He considered the question seriously, then shook his head. "No, you? None." She stretched, cat-like, then settled back against him. "Though we should probably get up. Chickens don't feed themselves. Let them wait." He pulled her closer, marveling at how natural it felt. "Just let me hold this a little longer." She relaxed into his embrace, and they lay together as the sun climbed higher, painting the cabin walls gold. The world and its demands could wait. For now, this was enough. Two people choosing each other over solitude, warmth over winter, hope over resignation. It wasn't a fairy tale ending. They both carried too much damage for that. But it was a beginning, and after so much ending, that felt like its own kind of miracle. The change came in the night, swift and brutal as a kick from a spooked horse. Eli woke to May thrashing beside him, caught in some nightmare's grip. When he touched her shoulder to wake her, she jerked away violently, eyes wide and unseeing in the darkness. "Mary?" The name fell from his lips without thought, and the damage was instant. May went rigid, her face crumpling as recognition flooded back. She rolled away from him, out of the bed, standing with her arms wrapped around herself like armor. "I need some air," she said, voice carefully controlled. "May, wait!" But she was already gone, the door closing with quiet finality behind her. Through the window, he watched her walk to the well, where she stood in her nightdress despite the cold, face turned up to the stars. He wanted to go after her, to explain that it meant nothing, just a slip of the tongue in the confusion of waking. But he knew that would be a lie. In that moment between sleep and consciousness, he'd reached for his dead wife. The truth of it sat like lead in his stomach. When she finally returned, she moved quietly in the darkness, gathering her clothes. He pretended to sleep as she dressed behind the privacy screen, then slipped out again. The sun was rising by the time she came back to start breakfast, and they both acted as if the night hadn't happened. But it had, and the wound festered between them. Over the following days, May threw herself into work with renewed intensity. The cabin had never been cleaner, meals never more elaborate. But she no longer met his eyes, no longer touched him even in passing. At night, she lay on the far edge of the bed, careful not to let even her nightdress brush against him. Eli retreated too, angry at himself, at her, at the whole impossible situation. He'd been a fool to think he could move forward, that the past would loosen its grip just because a lonely widow had shown him kindness. Mary was everywhere, in the curtains she'd sewn, the garden plot she'd started, the very walls of the home they'd built together. How could he give his heart to someone else when it was buried with his wife and child? The tension built like storm clouds, dark and heavy, waiting to break. It finally did on a Sunday morning when May was preparing to go to town for supplies. "I'll come with you," Eli said, surprising them both. She paused in packing the wagon. "That's not necessary. Maybe I want to. Do you, or are you just checking to make sure I come back?" The accusation stung because it held truth. Part of him was terrified she'd take the wagon to town and never return, leave him to his ghosts and his guilt. "That's not, isn't it?" She turned to face him fully for the first time in days. "You called me by her name, Eli. When you reached for me in the dark, you were reaching for her. It was a mistake. I was half asleep. No." Her voice was quiet but firm. "It was honest. Maybe the most honest you've been since that night you held me." She climbed onto the wagon seat, gathering the reins. "I'll be back by nightfall. The chickens are fed, and there's stew on the stove." She drove away without looking back, leaving him standing in the yard with the words unsaid choking his throat. He spent the day in restless motion, mending harnesses that didn't need mending, cleaning tack that already gleamed. Anything to keep from thinking about the hurt in her eyes, the resignation in her voice, As afternoon wore into evening and she hadn't returned, panic began to creep in. The roads were clear, but there were other dangers. Bandits sometimes worked the route between ranches and town. Wolves grew bold when hunger drove them. And what if she decided he was right? That staying was foolish, that she deserved better than a man who called her by his dead wife's name. He was saddling his horse to go look for her when he heard the wagon. Relief flooded through him, followed quickly by apprehension. He met her at the barn, taking the horses' heads while she climbed down. "Took longer than expected," she said, not meeting his eyes. "Mrs. Patterson cornered me at the general store. Had quite a lot to say." "About what?" "About me, about you, about the impropriety of our arrangement." She began unloading supplies with sharp, angry movements. "Apparently, the whole town knows I'm living here. They assume. Well, you can imagine what they assume. Let them talk. Easy for you to say." She hefted a sack of flour, and he moved to take it from her. She jerked away. "You're a man? A widower. You're allowed to find comfort where you will. But me? I'm the kind of woman who drives men to violence. Remember? Who brings curses and ruin. And now I'm adding homewrecker to the list, dishonoring poor Mary's memory by warming her husband's bed. May, the worst part is they're not wrong. Are they?" She finally looked at him, eyes bright with unshed tears. "I am in her bed, wearing her clothes, cooking in her kitchen, trying to fill a space that was never mine to fill." "That's not true." "Then why did you call her name?" The question hung between them like a blade. "Why do you still have that picture turned down like you can't bear to see it but can't bear to put it away either? Why does it feel like I'm competing with a ghost I can never match?" He had no answer. How could he explain that loving Mary was carved into his bones, that even wanting May felt like betrayal? How could he tell her that when he kissed her? He tasted ashes, that when he held her, he remembered another woman's shape. "I thought I could do this," May continued, her voice breaking. "I thought we could help each other heal. But you don't want to heal, Eli. You want to stay buried with them, and I can't be the shovel you used to dig your grave." She walked past him toward the cabin, and he caught her arm. She stopped but didn't turn. "Please," he said, not sure what he was asking for. "I'll stay through the end of the month," she said quietly. "Give you time to find someone else to help with the ranch. Then I'll go." "Where? Does it matter?" She pulled free of his grip. "Somewhere I'm not living in another woman's shadow. Somewhere I can be more than a pale substitute for what you really want." She went inside, leaving him alone in the gathering darkness. He stood there for a long time, watching stars emerge in the clear sky, feeling the weight of his choices settling around him like chains. That night, she made a pallet by the fire, refusing to share the bed. He didn't argue. They lay in their separate spaces, awake and aware of each other, the distance between them vast as an ocean despite the small room. In the morning, she was cordial but distant, speaking to him with the same polite detachment she might show a stranger. She cooked, cleaned, tended the animals, all with perfect competence and no warmth whatsoever. It was worse than anger would have been. At least anger showed she still cared enough to feel. 3 days passed in this awful limbo. Then, on the 4th night, Eli made a decision. He waited until she was at the stove, then stood and walked to the mantel. His hands shook as he picked up the photograph, turning it to face the room for the first time in 2 years. Mary smiled out at him, Sarah on her lap, both frozen in a moment of perfect happiness. The pain was immediate and crushing, but he forced himself to look, to really see them as they'd been, not broken and burned, but whole and beautiful and gone. They were lovely, May said softly from behind him. Yes, his voice was rough. They were. Tell me about this day. When the picture was taken, he traced the edge of the frame with one finger. It was Sarah's 2nd birthday. Mary made a cake, spent half our sugar ration on it. Sarah got more on her face than in her mouth. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Mary was so happy that day. Said we should have another baby. Give Sarah a brother or sister? I said we should wait. Save more money first. Practical. Always practical. She laughed and said money couldn't buy time. She was right. She usually was. He set the photograph carefully on the mantel, still facing out. I loved her. May. Loved her more than I thought possible. When she died, it was like someone reached into my chest and tore out everything that mattered. I didn't want to survive it. Tried not to, those first months, but I was too much of a coward even for that. May moved closer but didn't touch him. That's not cowardice, that's strength. Is it? He turned to face her. Because it doesn't feel strong. It feels like I'm betraying her memory every time I look at you and feel something. Like I'm proving the love wasn't real if I can feel anything for anyone else. Love isn't finite. Eli, the heart isn't a cup that empties. It's a well that deepens with use. She reached up, her hand hovering near his face but not quite touching. Loving me, if you could, wouldn't diminish what you had with her. It would honor it, because she taught you how to love. And that teaching shouldn't die with her. He caught her hand, pressing it to his cheek. I'm sorry for calling you her name, for making you feel like second choice. You're not May. You're different, completely different. And that terrifies me because I don't know how to do this without comparing, without measuring everything against what I lost. Then don't. She stepped closer, her other hand coming up to rest on his chest. Stop trying to recreate what was. We're not them. Eli, we're two broken people trying to make something new from the pieces. It won't look like what you had before. It can't, but that doesn't mean it can't be good. He pulled her against him, burying his face in her hair. Don't leave, please. I know I have no right to ask, but don't leave. Give me a reason to stay. A real reason. Not guilt or obligation or loneliness. Tell me you want me, May Sullivan. Not just a warm body to fill the empty space. Tell me you see a future where I'm more than just a ghost of her. He pulled back to look at her. Really look at her. Saw the strength in her spine, the kindness in her eyes, the stubborn tilt of her chin. Saw the woman who'd faced down winter and isolation and his own bitter rejection without breaking. Who'd made a place for herself through sheer force of will and gentle determination. I see you, he said softly. May Sullivan, widow, survivor, woman who hums while she cooks and argues with stubborn cattle and makes the best biscuits I've ever eaten. I see you, and I want you to stay. Not because you remind me of her, you don't. Because you remind me what it feels like to want tomorrow to come. She searched his face for a long moment, then rose up to kiss him. This time, he was fully present, tasting her mouth, feeling her body, knowing exactly who he held. When she whispered his name, he didn't hear echoes of the past, just the present, warm and real and his if he was brave enough to claim it. They made their way to the bed, moving slowly, carefully, giving each other time to change their minds, but neither did. When they came together, it was with a desperate tenderness, each touch a promise, each kiss an apology for the hurt they'd caused. Afterward, they lay entwined, her head on his chest, his fingers combing through her hair. The photograph watched from the mantel, but it no longer felt like judgment. Just memory, preserved but not enshrined. I won't be her, May said again. But this time it wasn't defiance, just fact, simple and clean. I know. He pressed a kiss to her forehead. Be you. That's all I want, all I need. She lifted her head to look at him. No more calling her name. No more. You have my word. He cupped her face in his hands. When I reach for you, I'm reaching for you. May Sullivan, the woman who saved me from myself. She smiled then, brilliant and true. And he realized he'd never really seen her smile before. Not fully, not without shadows. It transformed her face, made her beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with Mary's sweet prettiness and everything to do with strength and survival and hope. Then I'll stay, she said, for as long as you'll have me. Forever, then, that's a long time. Not long enough. They sealed the promise with a kiss, And outside, the moon rose full and bright over the ranch, blessing the new beginning being forged from the ashes of the old. The peace they'd found lasted exactly 3 weeks. Eli had just returned from checking the far pastures when he saw the horse tied at his fence post, a big bay gelding he didn't recognize. His hand went instinctively to his gun as he approached the cabin, but he could hear voices inside, May's and a man's, conversational rather than confrontational. He pushed open the door to find May at the table, serving coffee to a stranger. The man was rough-looking, weathered by sun and hard living, with the kind of careful eyes that meant trouble. When he saw Eli, he stood slowly, hands visible. "You'd be Hawthorne," the man said. It wasn't a question. "I am. And you're in my house. Name's Jake Morrison." He glanced at May, something unreadable in his expression. "I knew Tom Sullivan. Rode with him on the Brazos Drive 2 summers back." May's hands stilled on the coffee pot. "Jake was just telling me about the night Thomas died." "That so?" Eli moved further into the room, noting how May stepped subtly away from Morrison. "Thought that story was well established. Bar fight gone wrong." Morrison's smile was thin as winter ice. "That's one version. The version that got told to the sheriff. Sure enough, but Tom deserved better than lies over his grave." "What are you saying?" May's voice was steady, but Eli saw her knuckles white where she gripped the coffee pot. "I'm saying Tom never pulled a knife in his life. Wouldn't know which end to hold. That boy Chad Garrison, though, he came looking for a fight. Had his friends ready to swear whatever story needed swearing." Morrison's eyes never left May's face. "See, young Garrison had been sweet on you. Mrs. Sullivan didn't take kindly to Tom winning your hand, even less kindly to Tom calling him out for spreading stories about you after. That's not. Nobody ever said. Nobody wanted to cross the Garrisons. They own half the county, have the sheriff in their pocket neat as you please. But Tom was my friend, and I figure his widow deserves the truth." May sank into a chair, the coffee pot forgotten. "They said Thomas started it, said he was drunk, violent. Tom never touched liquor when he was working. And he'd just finished a drive, had his pay in his pocket, was planning to buy you something pretty with it. Told me so himself not 2 hours before." Morrison pulled a small package from his coat, set it on the table. "Found this in his saddlebags after. Figure he'd want you to have it." With shaking hands, May unwrapped the brown paper. Inside was a silver hair comb, delicate and lovely, the kind of thing a young husband would buy his wife with his first real wages. She made a sound that might have been a sob, pressing the comb to her chest. "Why now?" Eli asked, moving to stand behind May's chair. "Why come here 2 years later?" Morrison's face hardened. "Because Chad Garrison's been bragging, drinking in saloons from here to Austin, telling anyone who'll listen how he killed Tom Sullivan over a woman and got away clean. Even said he might pay the widow a visit, see if she's as pretty as he remembers." Eli's hand found May's shoulder, felt her trembling beneath his touch. He threatened her. Not in so many words, but men like that don't make social calls, if you take my meaning. Morrison stood, settling his hat. "Thought you should know, Tom was a good man, and his widow deserves better than what she got." "You seem like you might be inclined to see she gets it." After Morrison left, they sat in silence. May, still clutching the silver comb. "Finally," she spoke, voice hollow. "All this time, I blamed him, thought his pride got him killed, thought if I'd been a better wife, he wouldn't have needed to defend my honor." A bitter laugh escaped her. "But he died because another man wanted what was his, died for the crime of marrying me. May, and now that man might come here, bring his poison to your door." She stood abruptly, the comb clattering to the floor. "I have to go, tonight, before—" "You're not going anywhere." Eli caught her arms, turning her to face him. "You think I'd let you run? Let him drive you out into the cold again? You don't understand. The Garrisons are powerful. They have money, men, influence. If Chad decides he wants—" She broke off, shuddering. "I won't bring that down on you. Too late." You're here. You're mine. And any man who thinks different can discuss it with my Winchester. Eli, please, I've lost one man to violence. I can't. He kissed her, cutting off her protests. When he pulled back, her eyes were wet with tears. I'm not Thomas, he said quietly. I don't fight for pride or honor or any fool notion like that, but I'll fight to keep you safe. Any man comes here meaning harm will find more trouble than he bargained for. The whole town will turn against you. They already talk about us. If you stand against the garrisons, let them talk. Let them all come. If they're fool enough, this is my land. You're my woman, and I'll defend both till my last breath. She searched his face, then slowly nodded. But that night, she barely slept, starting at every sound. Eli lay awake beside her, hand on his gun, wondering when trouble would arrive. It came 5 days later. Eli was in the barn when he heard the horses, 3 of them, riding hard. He grabbed his rifle and moved to the door. Watching them approach, the lead rider was young, maybe 25, with the soft look of someone who'd never worked a day in his life. Chad Garrison. Had to be. The 2 men flanking him were hired muscle, no mistaking their type. Stay inside, he'd told May that morning. And for once she'd listened. He could see her shadow at the window, watching. The rider stopped just outside his fence, making no move to dismount. You Hawthorne? The young man called. I am, and you're trespassing. Chad Garrison. He said it like the name should mean something, bring fear or respect. When Eli showed neither, his face darkened. Heard you got something that belongs to me. Nothing here belongs to you, boy. The Sullivan widow. Heard she's keeping your bed warm these days. His smile was ugly. See, I had plans for that woman. Her husband interfered, but now he's gone, and I figure it's time to collect what's owed. The only thing owed is a rope for your neck, Eli said conversationally. Murder's still a hanging offense, even for rich men's sons. Garrison's face went red. Wasn't murder, was self-defense. Sheriff said so. Sheriff says what you pay him to say, but we both know the truth, just like we both know you'll ride away now and never come back. That a threat, cripple? Eli smiled, cold as winter dawn. A promise. See that rise behind you, about 300 yards? Good position for a marksman. And my friend up there, he's got a bead on you right now. Could put a bullet through your eye before you cleared leather. The hired men shifted nervously, scanning the horizon. There was no one there. Eli's nearest neighbor was miles away. But they didn't know that. You're bluffing. Maybe. Want to bet your life on it. Eli raised his voice. Jim, put one past his ear. Let him hear what's coming if he doesn't ride on. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then May appeared in the doorway of the cabin, holding Eli's old Henry rifle. She fired, the bullet whining past Garrison's head close enough to part his hair. The man's horse reared, nearly unseating him. Next one goes between your eyes, she called, already working the lever to chamber another round. I've buried one husband, I won't bury another. Garrison fought to control his mount, face pale beneath his hat. This isn't over. It is, Eli said. You come back here, you'll leave in a pine box. Touch her, threaten her, even look at her wrong in town, and I'll kill you where you stand. That's not a threat, boy. That's a promise before God and these witnesses. The hired men were already turning their horses, eager to be gone. Garrison glared hatred at them both, but he was young and soft and faced with 2 people who'd survived worse than him. After a moment, he spat in the dirt and wheeled his horse around. They watched until the riders disappeared over the rise. Then May lowered the rifle with shaking hands. Eli crossed to her, pulling her into his arms. That was some shooting. I was aiming for his chest, she admitted, and surprised them both by laughing, a shaky sound but real. God, I was terrified. You didn't show it. Neither did you, a marksman on the rise. Sometimes the threat's worth more than the reality. He kissed her forehead. But you made it real enough. Where'd you learn to shoot? Thomas taught me, said a woman alone on a ranch needed to know. Her voice softened. He was always trying to protect me. Even then, they stood together, watching the empty horizon. The immediate threat had passed, but they both knew it wasn't over. Men like Garrison didn't forget humiliation, especially at the hands of people they considered beneath them. "He'll be back," May said quietly. "Maybe, maybe not. Cowards like him prefer easy targets." He turned her to face him. "But if he comes, we'll be ready. Together. You could have let me go. Avoided all this. Could have." He cupped her face in his hands. "But then I'd have to live without you, and that's no living at all." She rose up to kiss him, fierce and grateful. When they broke apart, her eyes were bright with unshed tears. "I love you," she said, the words sudden and raw. "I didn't mean to, tried not to, but I do." He'd thought the words would stick in his throat, that saying them would be betrayal, but they came easy as breathing. "I love you too. God help us both." They went inside together, barring the door and checking the windows. That night, they made love with desperate intensity, clinging to each other against the darkness pressing in. Afterward, they lay entwined, listening for hoofbeats that didn't come. "We should go to the sheriff," May said eventually. "Tell him the truth about Thomas. Won't do any good if he's bought and paid for." "Then what do we do?" Eli was quiet for a long moment. "We live. We work the ranch. We face whatever comes. We don't let fear drive us. And if Garrison comes back..." He let the sentence hang, but she understood. "You'd kill for me?" "Already told you I would. And if you hang for it..." He turned to look at her in the moonlight. "Then I'll hang knowing you're safe. That's worth any price." She kissed him then, salt tears on both their faces. They'd found love in the ashes of loss, built something precious from broken pieces. Now they'd defend it with everything they had, knowing the cost might be everything. But in that moment, with her warm against him and the night quiet around them, Eli felt something he hadn't in years: hope. Not just for tomorrow, but for all the tomorrows after. A future worth fighting for, worth dying for if need be. The photograph on the mantel watched over them. Mary's smile gentle in the darkness. And Eli could almost believe she approved, that she'd want this for him, not the pain and danger, but the loving and being loved, the second chance at life. He pulled May closer and closed his eyes. Gun within reach but heart, for the first time in 3 years, at peace. The telegram came on a Tuesday morning, delivered by young Billy Matthews, who'd ridden hard from town. Eli read it twice, his face darkening with each word. "What is it?" May asked, drying her hands on her apron. He handed her the yellow paper. "Garrison's filed charges, says I threatened his life, that you took a shot at him unprovoked. Sheriff wants us both in town by Friday noon." May's face went pale. "They mean to arrest us. They mean to try." He crumpled the telegram, tossing it into the stove. "But we're not walking into their trap. If we don't go, they'll come here. But at least here we've got walls and weapons, not a jail cell and a bought judge." But by Thursday, Eli had reconsidered. Not going would make them look guilty, give Garrison more ammunition, and there was someone in town he needed to see, someone who might help even the odds. "You're staying here," he told May as he saddled his horse. "Like hell I am. May, the charges are against both of us. We face this together, or not at all." She was already dressed in her good dress, the brown one she'd worn that first day. "Besides, you need someone watching your back." He wanted to argue, but the set of her jaw told him it would be useless. They rode to town together, rifles across their saddles, watching the horizon for trouble. Redemption Creek looked the same as always. Dusty streets, false-fronted buildings, people going about their business. But heads turned as they passed, conversations stopping mid-sentence. News traveled fast in small towns, instead of the sheriff's office. Eli steered them toward a small house on the outskirts of town. Sam Carson, former sheriff before politics and Garrison money had voted him out, was working in his garden when they rode up. "Eli Hawthorne," Sam said, straightening with a grimace. He was older now, gray threading his beard, but his eyes were still sharp. "Heard you might be coming to town. Need your help, Sam. Can't help with legal troubles. I'm not sheriff anymore. But you know the truth about what happened to Tom Sullivan." Sam's eyes flicked to May, recognition dawning. "Ma'am, sorry for your loss. Was it murder?" May asked directly. "Did Chad Garrison kill my husband in cold blood?" Sam was quiet for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Couldn't prove it. Witnesses all told the same story. And the physical evidence?" He shrugged. "But yes, Tom Sullivan never carried a knife. Never started a fight in his life. Chad had been bragging about what he'd do when Tom got back from the drive. Everyone knew there'd be trouble." "Would you testify to that?" Eli asked. "My word against 3 witnesses and the current sheriff won't amount to much. It's something, maybe enough to make people think twice." Sam studied them both, then sighed. "All right, but you know this won't end in a courtroom, don't you? The Garrisons don't lose legal battles in this county. If you're going to fight them, it'll have to be another way." They left Sam's house with his promise to meet them at the sheriff's office. As they rode down Main Street, May suddenly grabbed Eli's arm. "There, coming out of the saloon." Chad Garrison stood on the boardwalk, flanked by the same 2 hired guns. He saw them at the same moment, his hand dropping to his pistol. "Keep riding," Eli murmured. "Not here, not in the street with witnesses." But Garrison was already moving, stepping into the street to block their path. Well, the cripple and his woman. Come to turn yourselves in. Come to see justice done," Eli replied evenly. "One way or another." "Or justice?" Garrison laughed. "You threatened me, shot at me. That's attempted murder in any court. Your court, maybe." May's voice carried clear across the street, and people began to gather, drawn by the promise of drama. "But not in God's court, not where the truth matters." "Truth?" Garrison's face twisted. "Truth is your husband was a nobody who got above himself. Truth is you're nothing but a—" "Careful," Eli warned, his hand moving to his gun. "Next word might be your last." The tension stretched taut. 24 townspeople frozen between storefronts, waiting to see who would draw first. Then Sheriff Watson appeared, 2 deputies behind him. "That's enough," Watson said, though his eyes were on Eli. "Not Garrison." "Hawthorne, Mrs. Sullivan, you're under arrest." "On what charge?" Sam Carson stepped from the crowd, his presence causing a murmur of surprise. "Sam, this isn't your concern anymore. Justice is everyone's concern. Pete. Or have you forgotten that along with your oath?" Watson's face reddened. "They're charged with attempted murder. Chad here has witnesses. Paid witnesses." Someone called from the crowd. Eli was surprised to see Jake Morrison leaning against a post. Several rough-looking riders with him. Same witnesses who lied about Tom Sullivan. The crowd stirred, whispers running through like wind through wheat. The Sullivan murder had been the talk of the town 2 years ago, and not everyone had believed the official story. "This isn't about Sullivan," Watson said, but uncertainty crept into his voice. "Isn't it?" May stepped down from her horse, moving to stand in the middle of the street. "Chad Garrison murdered my husband because he couldn't have me. Now he comes to our home, threatens us, and we're the criminals for defending ourselves? You shot at me!" Garrison snarled. "After you threatened to take what you called Aud." Her voice rang clear. "After you admitted you killed Thomas. Yes, I shot at you. And I'd do it again." More murmurs from the crowd. Some of the women pressed forward, recognition and sympathy in their faces. They knew what it meant for a woman alone to be visited by men like Garrison. "Enough talk," Watson said. "You're coming with me, both of you." "No," Eli said quietly. "We're not." The deputies reached for their guns, but stopped as several of Morrison's men shifted, hands near their weapons. The crowd pressed closer, the mood shifting from curiosity to something darker. "You want a war, Hawthorne?" Watson asked. "I want justice. For Tom Sullivan, for my woman, for every person the Garrisons have stepped on because they could." He raised his voice. How many of you have been cheated, threatened, run off your land by garrison money? How many looked the other way because fighting back meant ending up like Tom Sullivan? The crowd stirred restlessly. An old woman stepped forward. Mrs. Chen from the laundry. My husband's store burned down after he refused to sell to Garrison's father, she said in accented but clear English. Sheriff said it was an accident. My brother lost his farm when he couldn't pay a loan that tripled overnight. Another man called. Garrison Bank held the note. More voices rose. Years of resentment bubbling to the surface. Watson backed up a step, hand on his gun, but clearly overwhelmed. This is sedition. Garrison spat. You're all breaking the law. Your law, Sam Carson said. Not the law we elected to follow. Not the justice we were promised. The moment balanced on a knife's edge. Then May did something unexpected. She walked straight to Chad Garrison, stopping just out of arm's reach. You killed my husband, she said, voice steady. We both know it. Everyone here knows it. And someday, you'll pay for it, but not today. Today. I'm giving you a chance Thomas never had. Walk away. Leave this town, this county. Never come back. You're giving me a chance? Garrison laughed, but it sounded forced. You've got some nerve, woman. More than you. She turned to the crowd. We've all lost to men like him, but we don't have to keep losing. We don't have to keep being afraid. Shut your mouth, Garrison snarled, reaching for her. Eli's gun cleared leather faster than thought. The barrel pressed to Garrison's temple before he could blink. Touch her and die. Everything stopped. The deputies froze. Morrison's men tensed. The crowd held its breath. In that moment, the power structure of Redemption Creek trembled. You won't shoot, Garrison said, but sweat beaded on his forehead. Not in front of witnesses. Won't I? Eli's voice was conversational. Man who's lost everything once doesn't fear losing it again. Question is, are you ready to die for your pride? Pete, Sam Carson said quietly. Maybe it's time to remember what real law looks like. The kind that protects the innocent instead of the powerful. Watson looked around at the crowd, at the armed men, at the shifting tide of public opinion. He was outnumbered, outgunned, and standing on the wrong side of justice. Everyone could see it. Lower your gun, Hawthorne, he said finally. No one's getting arrested today. What? Garrison spluttered. I work for the law, Watson cut him off. And the law says self-defense isn't a crime. It also says false accusations are. You want to pursue this? We'll need a real investigation into everything, including what happened to Tom Sullivan. The threat was clear. Garrison looked around, seeing no support in the faces watching him. Even his hired guns had stepped back, not willing to face the crowd's anger. This isn't over, he said finally. Yes, May said quietly. It is. Garrison backed away, his men falling in beside him. They mounted up and rode out, not toward the Garrison ranch, but toward the county line. The crowd watched until they disappeared, then slowly began to disperse. Watson approached Eli and May, his expression unreadable. You've made powerful enemies today. We already had them, Eli replied, holstering his gun. Today we just made them public. The old man won't let this stand. Garrison Sr. has connections all the way to Austin. Then maybe it's time Austin heard what's been happening here. Sam Carson interjected. I still have friends in the Rangers. Might be they'd like to know how justice gets bought and sold in Redemption Creek. Watson paled at the mention of Rangers, then nodded curtly and walked away. The threat of outside investigation would keep the Garrisons cautious, at least for a while. Jake Morrison approached, tipping his hat to May. Tom would have been proud today, ma'am. You did right by him. Thank you for speaking up, she said. And for bringing your men. Tom rode for my brand? That makes his fights mine. He looked at Eli. You need anything, you send word. The Garrisons aren't the only ones with friends. As the street cleared, Eli and May stood together, the tension slowly draining from their bodies. They'd won for now. But victories like this came with prices. We can't stay, May said quietly. Even with the Rangers, even with the town on our side, the garrisons will find a way. Maybe, or maybe things change. Maybe standing up to them gives others the courage to do the same. He took her hand. Either way, we face it together. She squeezed his fingers. Together. They rode home in the afternoon light, knowing the future was uncertain but no longer feeling alone against it. The town had seen them, supported them, chosen justice over fear. It wasn't everything, but it was a start. That night, as they lay in bed, May traced the scar on Eli's jaw. You'd have done it. Shot him right there in the street. Yes. For me. For us. For the life we're building. For the chance to wake up beside you without looking over our shoulders. She kissed him then, soft and sweet. I never thought I'd have this again. Love. Hope. A future worth fighting for. Neither did I. He pulled her close. But here we are. Here we are. She agreed. And in the darkness, with danger still lurking but no longer unnamed, they found peace in each other's arms. Spring came early that year, melting the last of the winter snow and bringing wildflowers to the meadow where Mary and Sarah lay buried. Eli stood at their graves, hat in his hands, May beside him. It was the first time he'd brought her here, the first time he'd visited since the funeral 3 years past. I wanted you to meet them, he said quietly. Properly, I mean. May knelt, placing a bundle of early bluebonnets on each grave. Hello, Mary, Sarah. I'm May. I'm taking care of him now. Her voice was soft, respectful. I hope that's all right with you. The wind rustled through the grass, gentle as a whisper. Eli felt something ease in his chest, a knot he'd carried so long he'd forgotten it was there. They'd have liked you, he said. You think so? Mary always said I needed someone stubborn enough to handle me. And Sarah, his voice caught. Sarah would have loved having someone to bake with. She was always trying to help in the kitchen, making more mess than anything else. They stood together in comfortable silence, the ranch spreading below them, the cabin visible in the distance. It looked different now. May had planted a garden, hung curtains in the windows, added touches that made it a home again instead of just a shelter. We should head back, May said eventually. The Andersons will be here soon. Their neighbors were coming to help with the spring branding, the first time Eli had accepted such help since Mary's death. The change in town after the confrontation with Garrison had rippled outward. People who'd kept their distance now nodded in the street, stopped to talk, offered assistance. The Garrisons had left the county entirely, their departure celebrated quietly but thoroughly. As they walked back, Eli noticed May's hand go to her stomach, a gesture she'd been making more frequently lately. He'd seen Mary do the same in the early months with Sarah, before she'd told him about the baby. May? She looked at him, color rising in her cheeks. I was going to wait, to be sure, but... She took his hand, placed it on her still flat belly. I'm carrying your child, Eli. The world seemed to stop. He stared at her, unable to speak, joy and terror warring in his chest. A baby. Another chance. Another risk. Say something, she whispered. He pulled her into his arms, holding her tight enough to feel her heart beating against his chest. When? Late autumn. I think November, maybe early December. He kissed her then, deep and desperate, tasting hope and fear in equal measure. When they broke apart, both had tears in their eyes. I'm scared, he admitted. Me too, but Eli, this is a gift, a new beginning. What if... No. She put her fingers over his lips. No what ifs. We'll be careful. We'll be smart. But we won't live in fear. This baby deserves better than that. He nodded, swallowing hard. You're right. Of course you're right. A smile broke across his face, the first real, unguarded smile she'd seen from him. A baby. Our baby. Our baby. She agreed, laughing through her tears. They made it back to the cabin just as the Andersons arrived, followed by the Morrison crew and even Sam Carson with his grown sons. The day was filled with work and laughter, the sound of cattle and conversation. May worked alongside the men, tough as any ranch hand, until Eli firmly sent her to supervise the cooking instead. "I'm pregnant, not broken," she protested. "Humor me," he said, and she did, spending the day preparing enough food to feed the small army of helpers. As the sun set, everyone gathered around tables set up in the yard, sharing food and stories. Jake Morrison raised a glass of whiskey and toast. "To new beginnings," he said, looking meaningfully at Eli and May, "and to those brave enough to fight for them." "Here, here," the crowd echoed, and Eli felt the warmth of community he'd shut out for so long. Later, after everyone had gone, he and May sat on the porch, watching stars emerge in the clear sky. Her hand rested in his, their fingers intertwined. "I have something for you," she said, producing a wrapped package from behind her back. Inside was a leather-bound journal, pristine pages waiting to be filled. "What's this for?" "For writing down the stories, about Mary and Sarah, about your life before, about us and the baby, and whatever comes next." She touched his cheek. "So nothing gets forgotten. So our children know where they came from." Our children, plural. The optimism of it made him smile. "Will you help me with the words?" "Every word," she promised. That night, by lamplight, Eli opened the journal and began to write. He wrote about meeting Mary in her father's store, about Sarah's first steps, about the day his world ended and the day it began again when a widow stood at his fence in a snowstorm. May sat beside him, sometimes adding her own memories of Thomas, of the life she'd lost and the one she'd found. Summer brought the rangers Sam Carson had promised. They investigated not just the Sullivan murder but years of garrison corruption, taking statements from dozens of wronged citizens. By the time they left, arrest warrants had been issued for Chad Garrison and several others. Though they'd fled too far to be easily caught, the town breathed easier, free from the shadow that had loomed over it for so long. May's pregnancy progressed smoothly, her belly rounding as the months passed. Eli found himself talking to the baby at night, his hand spread over May's stomach, feeling the kicks and turns. The fear never fully left. How could it? But it was balanced by growing joy and anticipation. "What if it's a girl?" May asked one evening as they worked on the journal together. "Then she'll be as beautiful and stubborn as her mother. And if it's a boy? Then God help us all," he said, making her laugh. The ladies from town began visiting, bringing baby clothes and advice. Mrs. Chen taught May to knit. Mrs. Patterson, who'd once turned May out of her boarding house, came with an apology and a quilt she'd made herself. "I was wrong," she said simply. "About you, about everything. I hope you can forgive a foolish old woman." "There's nothing to forgive," May said graciously, though Eli saw the satisfaction in her eyes. As autumn arrived and May grew heavy with child, they began preparing in earnest. The small room off the main cabin, once meant for Sarah's little brother or sister, was cleaned and furnished. A cradle built by Anderson stood ready, filled with soft blankets knitted by a dozen hands. "The whole town's adopting this baby," May said, sorting through the gifts. "Good. Let them spoil it rotten. We'll need all the help we can get." The first pains came on a cold November night, wind rattling the windows like it had the day May arrived. Mrs. Chen, who'd learned midwifery from her mother, came quickly, along with 2 other women from town. Eli was banished to the porch with Sam Carson and Jake Morrison, who'd appointed themselves guards and companions for the expectant father. "Gets easier after the first one," Sam lied cheerfully, passing the whiskey bottle. "Don't listen to him," Jake countered. "I've got 4, and I nearly wore a hole in the floor pacing for each one." Inside, Eli could hear May's voice, strong despite the pain. He wanted to be with her, to hold her hand. But Mrs. Chen had been firm. Birthing was women's business, and nervous husbands only got in the way. The hours crawled by. Dawn was breaking when he heard it. A baby's cry. strong and healthy. He was on his feet before the sound fully registered. But Sam caught his arm. "Give them a minute to clean up," he advised. "Trust me on this." It was the longest minute of Eli's life. Then Mrs. Chen appeared at the door, smiling tiredly. "You have a son, Mr. Hawthorne, healthy and loud as thunder." He pushed past her, barely registering the congratulations. Focused only on reaching May. She lay propped against pillows, exhausted but radiant, a bundle in her arms. "Come meet your son," she said softly. The baby was perfect, red-faced and wrinkled, with a shock of dark hair and May's nose. When Eli took him, the weight felt right in his arms, familiar yet completely new. "What should we call him?" May asked. Eli looked down at his son, then at the woman who'd given him this gift. "Thomas," he said. "Thomas Samuel Hawthorne, after two good men." May's eyes filled with tears. "Thomas would have been honored, and Sam will be impossible," Eli added, making her laugh. They sat together as the sun rose, their son between them, the journal open on the bedside table waiting for this new chapter to be written. Outside, snow began to fall, gentle as a blessing. "Look at us," May murmured, touching the baby's cheek. "A year ago, we were strangers, broken people hiding from the world. And now we're a family." She looked up at him. "You saved me, Eli Hawthorne." "We saved each other," he corrected, kissing her temple. "And this little one? He's going to have the life we almost missed, full of love and laughter and probably more trouble than we can handle." "I can't wait," she said, and meant it. As if in agreement, Thomas Samuel Hawthorne opened his eyes, his father's eyes, and gazed up at them with a solemn baby wisdom. In that moment, the past truly became past, and the future stretched ahead full of infinite possibility. The journal would record it all. The sleepless nights, the first smile, the day little Tom took his first steps across the same floor where his parents had learned to dance again. It would record the arrival of his sister 2 years later, named Sarah May, and the way the ranch grew and prospered under hands united in love and purpose. But for now, in the quiet morning with snow falling soft outside, they simply held each other and marveled at the journey that had brought them here, from sorrow to joy, from loneliness to love, from winter to spring eternal. The cowboy who hadn't been looking for love and the widow who'd taken off her gloves had found more than either dreamed possible. They'd found home. Thank you for listening to this story of love, loss, and redemption in the Old West. Where are you enjoying this tale today? Please share in the comments below. I'd love to connect with listeners from around the world. Don't forget to subscribe to the From Wild West channel and share your thoughts about Eli and May's journey. Your comments and stories mean everything to us.